I never thought I'd be sharing this story. My name is Rosemary Winters, and what I experienced that cold November night changed everything I believed about good, evil, and the spiritual realm that exists right alongside our own world. That fateful night, I was driving home after visiting my grandchildren in Sacramento. It was around 11:30 p.m., and the highway was nearly empty. I'd just spent a wonderful evening watching my youngest grandson, Timothy, perform in his first school play. At 62 years old, these were the moments I lived for. The last thing I remember was reaching to adjust the heater. My car must have drifted onto the shoulder. When I overcorrected, everything happened so fast. The car spun out of control, crashed through the guardrail, and plummeted down a steep embankment. In those terrifying seconds before impact, I remember crying out, "Jesus, help me." Then, darkness. The medical report later showed that my heart had stopped for 13 minutes. The paramedics had to resuscitate me 3 times in the ambulance. But what happened during those 13 minutes felt like both an eternity and an instant. The first sensation was a profound peace washing over me, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. The pain, fear, and chaos of the accident vanished completely. I felt myself floating upward, away from my broken body below. As I rose higher, I became aware of a light that was brighter than anything I'd ever seen, yet it didn't hurt my eyes. It radiated pure love and warmth. What happened next defies earthly description, but I'll do my best to convey it. The light seemed to fold around me like a warm embrace, and suddenly I found myself in what I can only describe as the outskirts of heaven. The colors there. Oh, the colors. They weren't just things you saw with your eyes. Each color had depth, meaning, and even sound. Imagine seeing a shade of blue that makes you feel the very essence of peace, or a golden hue that rings with perfect joy. The ground beneath me wasn't solid like Earth's soil. It was more like standing on light that had somehow become firm enough to walk on. With each step, ripples of luminescence spread outward, creating harmonies that matched the movement. The air itself seemed alive with possibility and purpose. Then I noticed the flowers. If you can call them flowers. They were like our earthly blooms the way a masterpiece painting is like a child's crayon drawing. Each petal was intricate beyond imagination, containing patterns within patterns that shifted and changed as you looked at them. And they sang. Each flower gave off its own unique tone, all blending together in perfect harmony with the music that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The music. How can I possibly describe the music? It wasn't just sound. It was pure worship made audible. Imagine the most beautiful symphony you've ever heard, combined with the most touching lyrics, multiplied by infinity, and you might begin to approach what I experienced. The harmony had layers upon layers, each one perfect, each one adding depth to the whole. Some notes were so high and pure they would have shattered earthly ears, while others were so deep they seemed to resonate with the foundations of creation itself. As I stood there, overwhelmed by the beauty around me, I became aware of movement in the distance. At first, I thought they were streams of light, but as they drew closer, I realized I was seeing angels, real angels, nothing like the paintings or statues we have on Earth. The angels were beings of pure light and purpose. Their forms weren't fixed like our physical bodies. They shifted and flowed, while somehow maintaining distinct identities. Some appeared with multiple faces, each one reflecting a different aspect of God's character. Others had wings that weren't just for flight. They seemed to be made of living energy, each feather containing what looked like galaxies of stars. What struck me most about the angels was their joy. They radiated a happiness so pure and complete that it made our earthly pleasures seem like mere shadows. Their movements created ripples in the very fabric of heaven, leaving trails of light and harmony in their wake. Some were carrying what looked like scrolls of living light, while others held what appeared to be instruments made of pure energy. I watched as two angels passed near me, deep in conversation. Their words weren't English or any earthly language. They spoke in what seemed like pure thought and light, yet somehow I could understand them. They were discussing what we might call physics, but it was physics on a level that made our most advanced theories seem like simple addition. They were talking about how God's love holds the universe together, about the mathematical beauty of His creation, about harmonies that exist between physical and spiritual laws. The angels noticed me watching them, and their joy seemed to increase even more. One of them, a being so bright I could barely look at it, approached me. Its presence was overwhelming, but not frightening. I felt love, acceptance, and a deep sense of kinship radiating from it. "Welcome, little sister," it communicated, not in words but in pure thought and feeling. "You are here earlier than expected, but it is good to see you beginning to perceive reality as it truly is." I wanted to ask so many questions, but before I could, another presence appeared, one that made even this glorious angel seem dim by comparison. Jesus Himself stood before me, and everything else faded into the background. His presence was overwhelming in a way that defies description. Imagine the most perfect love you've ever experienced. Multiply it by infinity, and you might begin to approach what I felt in that moment. His face shone brighter than 1,000 suns, yet I could look at it without being destroyed. His eyes held depths of wisdom and love that made me want to fall on my face in worship. "Rosemary," he said, and his voice resonated through every fiber of my being. It was like hearing your name spoken for the first time, as if he was speaking not just to me, but to the very essence of who I was created to be. "You've arrived earlier than expected," he continued, "but there's something crucial I need to show you before you return." The love in his eyes was matched by an intensity that told me what I was about to see was of utmost importance. With a gesture, he changed the scene around us. We were now in what I can only describe as the throne room of heaven itself. Words fail to capture the glory of that place. The throne wasn't just a seat of authority, it was the very center of reality. Light, love, and power poured from it in waves that sustained all of creation. The air was thick with worship, and I could see what looked like living creatures made of eyes and wings, constantly crying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty." The floor was like a sea of glass mingled with fire, but it wasn't static. It moved and shifted, reflecting not just light but truth itself. Every step across it revealed new depths of God's character and nature. Above, what looked like a rainbow encircled the throne, but it wasn't just light split into colors. It was like seeing God's promises made visible, each hue representing a different aspect of His faithful character. Around the throne stood beings that made the angels I'd seen earlier look almost ordinary by comparison. These were the seraphim, the highest order of angels, their forms barely containable by my human perception. Each had 6 wings, 2 covering their faces in reverence, 2 covering their feet in humility, and 2 with which they flew. They were constantly in motion, their very existence a continuous act of worship. The cherubim were there too, different from the cute baby angels we often picture. These were mighty beings of power and authority, their forms shifting between different aspects of creation, faces of lions, oxen, eagles, and humans, all representing different aspects of God's character and creation. But even among these magnificent beings, one stood out. This angel was more glorious than all the others, his beauty beyond anything I could have imagined. This was Lucifer as he was meant to be, before pride corrupted his heart. His form seemed to be made of living gems, not just decorated with them, but composed of them. Emeralds, rubies, sapphires, and diamonds that weren't just stones, but seemed to be pure light crystallized into form. Each movement he made created cascades of color and harmony, that the other angels reflected and amplified. His wings were massive and seemed to contain entire universes within their span. But it wasn't just his appearance that was remarkable. He possessed a charisma that drew everything toward him, a presence that commanded attention without demanding it. When he sang, heaven itself seemed to vibrate in harmony with his voice. His worship was perfect, his understanding profound, his service complete. Jesus spoke softly, his words carrying infinite weight. Watch carefully, Rosemary. Few humans have ever seen what I'm about to show you. Understanding this will help you grasp the true nature of the battle being fought for every soul. I noticed that as Lucifer led the heavenly worship, there was something different about how he did it compared to the other angels. While they directed all attention and glory toward the throne, Lucifer seemed to be aware of his own role in the worship. It was subtle. So subtle that at first, I couldn't quite put my finger on what was different. Jesus explained, Lucifer was created as the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. He was the guardian of my Father's throne and the leader of heaven's worship. But watch what happens when a created being begins to focus on the gifts rather than the giver. As we watched, I began to understand what Jesus meant. Lucifer's movements became ever so slightly more dramatic, his gestures more elaborate. It was as if he was becoming aware of his own performance, adding flourishes that drew attention to his skill, rather than directing all glory to God. The other angels continued their perfect worship, their forms shifting between different aspects of praise, sometimes appearing as pure light, sometimes as living flame, sometimes as beings of such complexity that my human mind could barely comprehend them. Each had their own unique beauty and purpose, but none sought to draw attention to themselves. I saw angels whose forms seemed to be made of pure music, their very existence a song of praise. Others appeared to be living mathematics, their movements describing perfect equations that revealed God's order in creation. Some were like living books, their forms containing and preserving the stories of God's faithfulness throughout time. There were angels whose primary purpose seemed to be to reflect and amplify God's light throughout creation. Others were messengers, their forms designed for swift flight between heaven and earth. Still others appeared to be warriors, their very presence a declaration of God's protection over his creation. What amazed me was how all these different beings worked together in perfect harmony. It was like watching the most complex dance imaginable, where every movement of every participant contributed to the greater whole. There was no competition, no jealousy, no desire to be something other than what they were created to be. Jesus showed me how each angel had a unique role in maintaining the order of creation. Some were responsible for what we would call the laws of physics, ensuring that gravity continued to function, that light behaved according to God's design, that the strong and weak nuclear forces held atoms together. Others oversaw the movements of celestial bodies, keeping planets in their orbits and stars burning at the right intensity. There were angels whose task was to record every event in creation, others who specialized in answering prayers, and still others who fought spiritual battles we cannot see. Each had their place, each was perfectly suited to their role, and each found complete fulfillment in carrying out their designated purpose. The harmony of heaven was beyond anything we can imagine on earth. It wasn't just about music, though the music was incredible. It was about perfect relationship, perfect purpose, perfect love. Every being knew their role and delighted in it, finding joy in contributing to the greater whole. Jesus explained how this harmony was maintained by each being's focus on God rather than themselves. True worship, he said, is not about the worshiper. It's about the one being worshipped. When a created being begins to focus on their own part in worship rather than the one they're worshiping, corruption begins. He showed me how the angels' worship affected creation itself. Their songs and movements weren't just expressions of praise. They were part of how God's power and love flowed through the universe. The harmony of heaven maintained the harmony of creation. Every note, every movement, every thought of praise contributed to the perfect order God had established. Then Jesus directed my attention back to Lucifer. "Watch carefully," he said. "You're about to see how pride can corrupt even the most perfect created being." As Jesus and I continued to watch, he showed me how Lucifer's corruption began. It was fascinating and heartbreaking to see how such a perfect being could fall so far. The process wasn't sudden. It happened in subtle stages that Jesus helped me understand. "Watch this moment carefully," Jesus said, directing my attention to Lucifer as he led the heavenly hosts in worship. The scene seemed to slow down, allowing me to notice details I might have missed. Lucifer was singing a song of indescribable beauty, his voice carrying through heaven with perfect pitch and tone. But then something changed, something so subtle that at first I almost missed it. He began to add his own flourishes to the song, small embellishments that weren't part of the original melody. "This," Jesus explained, "is the first seed of pride taking root." Watch how he begins to focus more on his own contribution to the worship than on the one being worshipped. I observed as Lucifer started spending more time looking at his own reflection in the crystal-clear floors of heaven. At first, it was just brief glances, but gradually, these moments became longer. He would study his own form, admiring how the light played off his gem-encrusted being. Jesus showed me Lucifer's thoughts during these moments. The first dangerous thought was subtle. "How wonderfully God has made me." This seemed innocent enough, but it quickly progressed to, "How wonderful I am." The shift was small but significant, from praising the Creator to praising the creation. I watched as Lucifer began to compare himself to other angels. When another angel would sing particularly well, I could see a flicker of something new in Lucifer's expression. Not appreciation, but competition. He would then sing even more elaborately, making sure his voice stood out above the rest. "Pride," Jesus explained, "often begins with comparison." Watch how he starts to measure himself against others, forgetting that each angel was created unique and perfect for their specific purpose. The corruption progressed in distinct stages that Jesus helped me understand. First came self-awareness, not the humble recognition of one's place in God's creation, but an excessive focus on self. Lucifer began to spend more time thinking about his own role, his own beauty, his own abilities. Then came comparison, measuring himself against other angels and finding satisfaction in being better. This led to a subtle shift in his relationships with other angels. Instead of serving alongside them in joyful fellowship, he began to see them as an audience for his talents. The third stage was entitlement. I watched as Lucifer began to expect special treatment because of his abilities and position. When other angels didn't acknowledge his superiority, I could see flickering moments of irritation in his countenance. "Notice," Jesus said, "how he begins to believe he deserves more than what he has been given." This is a crucial moment in the development of pride, when gratitude turns to expectation. The fourth stage was ambition, not the holy ambition to serve God better, but the selfish ambition to be more than what God had created him to be. I saw Lucifer begin to imagine himself in God's position, fantasizing about receiving worship rather than giving it. As these changes took place in Lucifer's heart, his appearance began to subtly alter. The light that had once flowed through him freely now seemed to be caught and held, as if he were trying to possess it rather than reflect it. His movements, once perfectly synchronized with heaven's harmony, became slightly out of step, not enough to be obviously wrong, but enough to create tiny discordant notes in the perfect symphony of heaven. Jesus showed me how Lucifer began to influence other angels. It started with casual conversations, seemingly innocent questions. Have you ever wondered why God keeps certain knowledge from us? Or, don't you think we deserve more recognition for our service? I watched as he would gather small groups of angels, ostensibly for worship practice, but really to showcase his own abilities. During these sessions, he would subtly encourage them to focus more on their own performance than on true worship. "You have such unique talents," he would say. "Why should you hold back? Why not express yourself fully?" The way he spread doubt was masterful and terrible to witness. He never directly questioned God's goodness, at first. Instead, he would plant seeds of curiosity that, if nurtured, would grow into doubt. Isn't it interesting that God has forbidden certain areas of knowledge to us? What do you think he's protecting us from? Or is he protecting himself? I saw how he would adapt his approach depending on which angel he was speaking to. With the more ambitious angels, he would stoke their desire for recognition and power. With the more intellectual ones, he would engage them in philosophical debates about the nature of authority and freedom. With the more service-oriented angels, he would suggest that they were being taken for advantage. "Observe," Jesus said, "how he uses partial truths to make his deceptions more convincing. Every lie he tells contains a grain of truth, twisted to serve his purposes. The corruption spread like a subtle poison through heaven. Some angels recognized the danger immediately and withdrew from Lucifer's influence. Others were intrigued by his questions and began to spend more time in his presence, gradually adopting his way of thinking. I watched as Lucifer's rebellion took more concrete form. He began to organize his followers, establishing a hierarchy among them that mimicked but distorted heaven's natural order. He would reward those who showed particular loyalty to him with positions of authority, creating a shadow government within heaven itself. The changes in the angels who followed him were painful to watch. Their light began to dim, their movements became less graceful, their songs took on a harsh edge. But most didn't notice these changes because they happened so gradually. Like Lucifer, they began to believe that their growing dissatisfaction was a sign that they deserved more, not that they were losing something precious. Jesus showed me how Lucifer's pride led him to misinterpret everything around him. When God showed mercy to any being, Lucifer saw it as weakness. When God established boundaries, Lucifer saw it as restriction rather than protection. When God received worship, Lucifer saw it as God hoarding glory rather than blessing his creation through their worship. Pride, Jesus explained, doesn't just corrupt actions, it corrupts perception. Watch how Lucifer begins to see everything through the lens of his own desires. The moment of open rebellion, when it came, was both sudden and the culmination of a long process. I saw Lucifer gather his followers, now numbering a third of heaven's angels, for what appeared to be a grand worship service. But instead of leading them in praise to God, he began to speak of a new order in heaven. His speech was masterful, playing on all the doubts and desires he had carefully cultivated. Why should we bow to anyone? Are we not mighty beings in our own right? Has God not withheld from us what should rightfully be ours? We could be gods ourselves. The response among the angels was immediate and dramatic. Those who had remained faithful were horrified, while those who had bought into Lucifer's lies cheered. The division that had been growing quietly now became open and absolute. Then came the moment that changed everything. Lucifer, in all his corrupted beauty, approached God's throne. His voice, still magnificent but now twisted with pride, rang out through heaven. "I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High." The instant these words left his lips, everything changed. The light that had been dimming in him now began to actively corrupt, turning into something dark and terrible. His beauty became horrifying. His wisdom turned to cunning. His power became destructive rather than creative. War broke out in heaven. It wasn't a war with physical weapons as we know them, but something far more fundamental. It was truth against lies, light against darkness, love against pride. The faithful angels, led by Michael, stood firm against Lucifer and his followers. Jesus showed me how this battle affected all of creation. Each clash between light and darkness sent shockwaves through the universe. The very fabric of reality trembled as created beings fought against their Creator's authority. The faithful angels fought with perfect coordination and unity, their movements flowing together in harmony with God's will. In contrast, Lucifer's forces fought with desperate intensity but lacked true unity, each one ultimately fighting for their own interests rather than a shared purpose. I saw Michael confront Lucifer directly. The clash between them was beyond my ability to fully comprehend, but I could see that while Michael fought with righteous authority, Lucifer fought with corrupted power. Michael's sword seemed to be made of pure truth, cutting through Lucifer's deceptions. The battle ended not with a prolonged struggle, but with a word from God himself. Lucifer and his followers were cast out of heaven, falling like lightning to the earth. Their forms, once so beautiful, became fully corrupted, reflecting the darkness they had chosen. Jesus showed me how this fall affected not just the rebellious angels, but all of creation. Death and decay entered the world. The perfect harmony of creation was disrupted. The earth, which had been meant to be a perfect extension of heaven's beauty, became a battleground between light and darkness. But watch carefully, Jesus said, because even in this tragedy, my Father's greater purpose was at work. He showed me how God would use even this rebellion to bring about a greater good, how humans, by choosing faith and love in the midst of a fallen world, could achieve something even the unfallen angels couldn't fully comprehend. The faithful angels who had resisted Lucifer's deception now took on new roles. Some became messengers between heaven and earth, others warriors protecting God's people, still others ministers of God's grace to humanity. I saw how the battle that began in heaven continues on earth in a different form. The same tactics Lucifer used to deceive the angels, pride, doubt, twisted truth, he now uses to deceive humans. But I also saw how God provides protection and guidance through his word and his spirit. Jesus explained that this is why humility is so crucial for spiritual life. Pride, he said, was the original sin that corrupted the most perfect created being. Humility is the virtue that protects against all others' sins. He showed me how Lucifer's fall serves as both a warning and a teaching tool. It warns us about the dangers of pride and self-focus, while teaching us the importance of remaining grateful and dependent on God. After showing me Lucifer's fall, Jesus turned to me with an expression of infinite compassion. "Now, Rosemary," he said, "let me show you how this ancient battle continues in your world today." The scene around us shifted, and suddenly we were looking down at Earth from a spiritual perspective I had never imagined possible. What I saw took my breath away, if I had still needed to breathe in that state. The physical world appeared semi-transparent, like looking through clear water. But superimposed over it was another reality, a spiritual dimension where light and darkness engaged in constant warfare. It was like seeing two worlds occupying the same space, one material and one spiritual, both equally real and constantly interacting. "Watch carefully," Jesus said, "because what I'm about to show you will help you understand the true nature of spiritual warfare." I saw threads of light connecting people to heaven, some bright and strong, others dim and fragile. These connections pulsed with prayer, worship, and acts of love. Around some people, particularly those deep in prayer or worship, there was a luminous glow that seemed to push back the darkness. But I also saw dark tendrils reaching out from the shadows, trying to attach themselves to people. These weren't physical things. They were spiritual influences, temptations, and deceptions. They operated much like the subtle doubts Lucifer had used in heaven, but now adapted for human weaknesses. Jesus began to explain the nature of this ongoing battle. The war that began in heaven, he said, now continues in human hearts. Satan cannot force anyone to sin, just as he couldn't force the angels to rebel. But he uses the same tactics: pride, doubt, and twisted truth. He showed me how spiritual warfare manifests in daily life. I saw a businessman making a decision at work. Around him, I could see both light and darkness, trying to influence his choice. The light whispered truth and integrity, while the darkness suggested that everyone cuts corners sometimes. Notice, Jesus said, how the enemy rarely suggests obvious evil. Instead, he specializes in small compromises that lead people away from truth one step at a time. I watched as people went about their daily lives, each one surrounded by spiritual forces they couldn't see. A mother speaking harshly to her child was being influenced by dark thoughts of frustration and anger. But when she stopped, took a breath, and chose patience, I saw light strengthen around her. Jesus showed me how modern life often works to our spiritual disadvantage. In your time, he said, people are constantly bombarded with noise, entertainment, and distractions. This makes it harder to hear the still, small voice of truth. I saw how social media and technology, while not inherently evil, could become tools for spreading pride, envy, and division. The same patterns that had corrupted angels in heaven were playing out through likes, shares, and comments. The constant comparison, the desire for recognition, the focus on self. But watch what happens, Jesus said, when someone chooses to resist these influences. He showed me a young person feeling tempted to post something cruel about a classmate. As they paused and chose kindness instead, I saw light flood into their spirit, strengthening their connection to heaven. This small victory had ripple effects in the spiritual realm, encouraging others around them. Jesus then revealed how spiritual warfare affects different aspects of life. In relationships, I saw how pride and selfishness could create barriers between people, while humility and forgiveness built bridges of light. Every choice to forgive, to show patience, to put others first, strengthened the light in and around those relationships. In churches, I saw both beautiful light and troubling darkness. Where people genuinely sought God and served others, the light was strong. But where there was competition, gossip, or pride, darkness crept in, often disguised as religious zeal. In business and politics, I saw how the enemy often worked through systems and structures, encouraging greed and the abuse of power. But I also saw how individuals within these systems could choose integrity and service, becoming points of light in dark places. Jesus showed me specific tactics the enemy uses in modern spiritual warfare. Busyness was a major strategy. When people are too busy to pray, to reflect, to serve others, Jesus explained, they become vulnerable to deception. Digital addiction was another tool, keeping people disconnected from real relationships and constant spiritual awareness. Isolation was particularly effective. The enemy knows that believers are stronger together, Jesus said. He works to keep them isolated, making them easier targets. But then Jesus showed me the weapons available for spiritual warfare. They weren't physical weapons, but spiritual ones: truth, righteousness, faith, peace, and the Word of God. Watch how these operate in daily life, he said. I saw someone reading the Bible in the morning, and it was like they were putting on spiritual armor. Each truth they absorbed became a shield against deception. When temptation came later in the day, these truths would rise up as a defense. Prayer was even more powerful than I had imagined. When people prayed, it was like they were connecting to a direct source of light and power. I saw prayers rising like beams of light, strengthening the connections between heaven and earth. But the most powerful weapon, Jesus said, is love. He showed me how genuine, self-giving love was like kryptonite to the forces of darkness. When someone chose to love their enemy, forgive an offense, or serve without recognition, it created bursts of light that the darkness couldn't overcome. Jesus then revealed something that amazed me: how angels are involved in modern spiritual warfare. I saw guardian angels protecting people, warrior angels fighting against dark forces, and messenger angels bringing guidance and encouragement. These faithful ones, Jesus explained, continue to serve in the battle that began in heaven. They protect, guide, and strengthen believers, though usually unseen. I watched as angels strengthened someone who was struggling with depression, bringing God's comfort and hope. I saw them protecting a child from danger, guiding a pastor in preparing a sermon, encouraging a missionary in a difficult situation. But Jesus made it clear that while angels help, the crucial choices remain with humans. Each person must choose whom they will serve, he said. No angel can make that choice for them. He showed me how spiritual warfare often centers around the mind. The battle, he said, is largely for what people believe and focus on. I saw how negative thoughts, if entertained, could become footholds for darkness. But when people chose to take every thought captive to Christ, replacing lies with truth, light would flood their minds. Jesus revealed how worship acts as a powerful weapon in spiritual warfare. True worship, he said, aligns created beings with their Creator's purposes, just as it did in heaven before Lucifer's fall. I saw people worshiping, and it was like they were joining the eternal song of heaven. Their praise strengthened the light around them and pushed back the darkness. Even in difficult circumstances, choosing to worship brought spiritual breakthrough. Then Jesus showed me something particularly relevant to our time: how spiritual warfare manifests in the digital age. I saw both opportunities and dangers in technology and social media. The enemy, Jesus explained, seeks to use these tools to promote pride, division, and isolation. But they can also be used to spread truth and encourage connection. I watched as people used their phones and computers. Some were building others up, sharing truth, and fostering genuine community. Others were tearing down, spreading lies, or feeding their own pride. Jesus showed me how the same pride that corrupted Lucifer now works through social media: the constant self-promotion, the need for likes and followers, the carefully curated images that breed comparison and discontent. But he also showed me people using these same platforms to encourage others, share their faith, and build genuine connections. The tool itself is neutral, he said. What matters is the heart behind its use. I saw how spiritual warfare affects different generations uniquely. The elderly often battled isolation and the temptation to feel useless or bitter. Middle-aged adults struggled with busyness and materialism. Young adults faced battles with identity and purpose. Teenagers dealt with intense pressure to conform and perform. Children were increasingly exposed to darkness through media and cultural influences. But Jesus showed me how each generation also had unique strengths in spiritual warfare. The elderly had wisdom and prayer power. Middle-aged adults could influence multiple spheres of society. Young adults had energy and idealism for God's kingdom. Teenagers could be powerful witnesses to their peers. Children often had simple but strong faith. The key, Jesus said, is for all generations to work together, each contributing their strengths to the spiritual battle. He showed me how the enemy works to keep generations separated in churches and families, knowing that division weakens the overall spiritual impact. Then Jesus revealed something crucial about modern spiritual warfare: the importance of community. Just as Lucifer isolated angels to deceive them, he said, the enemy works to isolate believers today. I saw how genuine Christian community provides protection, encouragement, and accountability. When believers gathered in authentic fellowship, their individual lights combined to create a powerful spiritual influence. Jesus showed me specific battlegrounds in modern spiritual warfare: the mind, where thoughts and beliefs are formed; the heart, where emotions and desires reside; the will, where choices are made; relationships, where love is tested; time, how it's used or wasted; resources, how they're acquired and shared; influence, how it's used to help or harm. For each battleground, he showed me both the enemy's tactics and God's provision for victory. In the mind, the enemy planted doubts, while God provided truth. In the heart, the enemy stirred up fear, while God offered peace. In the will, the enemy pushed for compromise, while God gave strength to stand firm. In relationships, the enemy sowed division, while God enabled reconciliation. With time, the enemy promoted waste, while God taught stewardship. With resources, the enemy encouraged greed, while God inspired generosity. With influence, the enemy suggested manipulation, while God demonstrated servant leadership. Jesus showed me how each faithful angel had their own moment of decision when confronted with Lucifer's deception. Their responses varied, but all centered on one crucial truth. They recognized that their beauty and power were gifts from God, not grounds for pride. I watched as Michael, the great warrior angel, faced Lucifer's temptation. Lucifer appealed to Michael's strength and authority, suggesting that such a powerful being deserved more recognition. Michael's response was profound in its simplicity. "All my strength comes from God and returns to Him in service. What you offer is nothing compared to the joy of serving Him." Gabriel's encounter was different. Lucifer tried to tempt him with greater knowledge and influence, knowing Gabriel's role as heaven's chief messenger. But Gabriel's wisdom proved greater than Lucifer's cunning. "Every message I carry reveals God's character," he replied. "Why would I want to speak my own words when I have the privilege of speaking His?" Jesus showed me the different ranks and roles of the faithful angels, each one teaching unique lessons about service and devotion. The seraphim, those mighty beings closest to God's throne, demonstrated perfect worship. Their cry of, "Holy, holy, holy," wasn't just words. It was their entire being poured out in adoration. Despite their exalted position, they covered their faces with their wings, showing that even the highest created beings approach God with humility. "Notice," Jesus said, "how they never grow tired of worship. Each glimpse of God's glory reveals new wonders to praise." The cherubim, guardians of God's holiness, showed steadfast dedication to their purpose. After Lucifer's fall, they took on even greater responsibilities. I saw them guarding the way to the tree of life in Eden, their flaming swords representing both judgment and mercy, preventing access to eternal life in a fallen state while pointing to the future hope of restoration. The thrones, those magnificent beings who help administer God's government, demonstrated perfect justice tempered with mercy. They showed how authority should be exercised, not for self-promotion, but for maintaining the harmony of God's creation. I saw angels whose primary role was recording the deeds of men and the unfolding of God's plan. They kept the heavenly books with perfect accuracy, yet did so with tears of compassion for human failures and joy for every act of faith and love. There were angels dedicated to praising God through music, their songs containing harmonies impossible in our physical realm. What amazed me was how they found new aspects of God's character to praise even after eons of existence. Jesus showed me warrior angels, their armor gleaming with holy light. "These," he said, "fight not for glory but for love, love of God, and love of those they protect." I watched as guardian angels carried out their duties with incredible devotion. They didn't resent being assigned to protect humans, who were lower beings. Instead, They took joy in serving God by serving His beloved children. "Look at how they handle their duties," Jesus said. "I saw guardian angels protecting children from accidents, whispering warnings to avoid danger, and strengthening people in moments of temptation. They celebrated every small victory in the lives of those they protected." Jesus showed me how the faithful angels interact with humans in ways we rarely perceive. I saw them gathering prayers like precious incense, carrying them before God's throne. They added their own prayers to ours, their perfect understanding of God's will enhancing our imperfect petitions. I watched angels minister to people in grief, wrapping them in unseen wings of comfort. Though the people couldn't see their comforters, the peace they felt was real. "My faithful ones," Jesus explained, "often work through natural means, an encouraging thought, a timely phone call from a friend, a verse of scripture brought to mind at just the right moment." I saw angels rejoicing over every sinner who repented, every act of forgiveness, every choice for love over hate. Their joy wasn't diminished by the fact that humans couldn't see them celebrating. They took genuine delight in our spiritual growth. Jesus showed me how angels assist in spiritual warfare. Unlike action movies or popular imagery, their warfare wasn't primarily physical. They fought with truth against lies, light against darkness, love against hate. I watched as angels strengthened believers who were standing for truth in difficult situations. They didn't fight the battles for them, but provided the spiritual resources needed for victory. "Notice," Jesus said, "how they never seek credit for their assistance. Their joy is in seeing my children walk in truth." The faithful angels demonstrated perfect teamwork. Unlike Lucifer's followers, who competed for position and recognition, these angels worked in seamless harmony. Each one's service enhanced the others, creating a symphony of purpose. I saw angels working across time and space, unhindered by physical limitations. They could be present at multiple places, yet never lost their focus on individual tasks. Their service was both cosmic in scope and intimate in attention to detail. Jesus showed me how angels interact with different aspects of creation. Some worked with the forces of nature, ensuring that physical laws continued to operate according to God's design. Others tended to the needs of animals, plants, and ecosystems. Still others were involved with the movements of celestial bodies. All creation, Jesus explained, receives angelic assistance, though creation itself remains under the effects of the fall. I saw angels weeping over the damage sin had done to God's perfect world, yet working tirelessly to preserve what was good and restore what was damaged, always within the bounds of God's plan. The faithful angels also played crucial roles in human history. Jesus showed me how they had appeared to prophets, guided kings, protected God's people, and delivered messages at pivotal moments. "They continue this work today," Jesus said, "though usually unseen." I watched as angels guided missionaries to specific people who were ready to hear the gospel. They protected Christians facing persecution. They strengthened those who were wavering in their faith. Jesus showed me how angels assist in worship. When humans praise God, angels join in, adding their perfect harmonies to our imperfect offerings. They take joy in every genuine expression of worship, no matter how simple. I saw angels particularly active during times of prayer. They not only carried prayers to heaven, but also helped create an atmosphere conducive to communion with God. "The faithful ones," Jesus explained, "understand that prayer is more than asking for things. It's about aligning with God's purposes." I watched as angels celebrated answers to prayer, not just the yes answers, but also the no and wait answers, because they could see how all fit into God's perfect plan. Jesus showed me how angels minister to the dying. They provided comfort and peace, helping believers transition from earthly life to heavenly reality. For those who knew Christ, death was not a fearful thing, but a homecoming. with angels serving as honor guards for the journey. The faithful angels demonstrated perfect patience. Unlike humans, they didn't become frustrated with our slow spiritual growth or repeated failures. They took the long view, seeing how each small step of faith contributed to God's ultimate purpose. "Watch how they handle failure," Jesus said. "I saw angels dealing with situations where humans rejected God's guidance or chose paths of destruction. Rather than becoming discouraged, they continued their service with undiminished devotion. Jesus showed me how angels rejoice over spiritual growth in all its forms: a child's first genuine prayer, a teenager choosing integrity over peer pressure, an adult forgiving a long-held grudge, an elderly person maintaining faith through suffering. Each victory, no matter how small it might seem from a human perspective, was celebrated in the spiritual realm. The faithful angels also demonstrated perfect discernment. They were never fooled by appearances or deceived by false spirituality. They recognized genuine faith beneath rough exteriors and saw through polished religious facades that lacked true devotion. I watched as angels ministered in churches. They were most active not where the music was loudest or the programs most numerous, but where genuine worship and love were present. "My faithful ones," Jesus explained, "are drawn to authentic faith, not religious performance." Jesus showed me how knowledge of spiritual warfare should transform our daily choices. I watched as he revealed modern scenarios where the same patterns of pride and deception that corrupted Lucifer play out in subtle ways. "Notice," he said, "how pride often disguises itself as virtue." I saw a pastor building a megachurch, his initial passion for serving God gradually shifting to focus on attendance numbers and personal recognition. The pattern mirrored Lucifer's corruption, starting with genuine gift and calling, then subtly turning toward self-glorification. But Jesus also showed me the antidote. Another pastor, faced with similar success, remained humble by constantly redirecting praise to God and focusing on individual souls rather than statistics. His light grew brighter with each act of genuine service. Jesus revealed how social media has become a modern battleground. Watch how the enemy uses these tools to promote the same self-focus that led to Lucifer's fall. I saw people crafting perfect online personas, each like building their own miniature throne from which to receive worship. The parallel to Lucifer's desire for recognition was striking, but I also saw others using the same platforms to genuinely encourage, to share truth, to build real connections. "The tool itself is neutral," Jesus explained. "What matters is the heart behind its use." He showed me how modern technology can either isolate us from real relationships or be used to strengthen genuine community. I watched as people chose between using their phones to escape reality versus using them to coordinate acts of service and encourage others. Jesus revealed something profound about how spiritual warfare affects our daily lives. Let me share what he showed me. In our families, I saw the enemy using the same tricks he used in heaven. He targets family relationships, turning small hurts into deep wounds. Yet there's hope. When family members choose forgiveness and humble love, their homes become like bright lights in a dark world. In workplaces, I saw how the corporate world can feed prideful ambition, much like Lucifer's desire for promotion. But something beautiful happens when people choose to be honest and serve others instead of promoting themselves. Their choices create spaces where God's presence transforms the whole workplace culture. In churches, Jesus showed me how spiritual pride can corrupt even holy things. He said, "Just as Lucifer turned worship into performance, many people turn faith into a religious show." But then he showed me real communities where humble worship and genuine love create strong barriers against darkness. In our personal lives, we face daily choices between pride and humility. Should we take credit or give it away? Should we demand our rights or show grace? Should we promote ourselves or serve others? Each choice either strengthens or weakens our spiritual armor. Then Jesus showed me practical ways to use these truths in our lives. He talked about morning prayer and meditation. Start each day acknowledging your dependence on God, he said. I watched how people who began their days in humble prayer were better protected against pride throughout their day. About our thought life, Jesus showed me something crucial. He said, "Just as Lucifer's fall began with proud thoughts, victory begins with taking every thought captive." I saw people learning to spot and reject proud thoughts before they could take root. Our words matter too. The way we talk shows and strengthens our spiritual condition. I watched people learn to stop promoting themselves and start using words that built others up and gave glory to God. Jesus had wisdom about handling success. Success, he said, often tests us more than failure. I saw how people who received praise could either let it feed their pride or use it to glorify God. When it comes to criticism, Jesus showed me something important. How we respond to criticism reveals our spiritual health. Those who got defensive missed chances to grow, while those who humbly accepted correction grew stronger. Service plays a special role. I saw how choosing to serve quietly, without recognition, builds spiritual strength. Private acts of service, Jesus explained, are powerful weapons against pride. Staying connected in real community matters, even when it's uncomfortable. This protects us from the isolation that makes us easy targets for deception. Jesus then showed me how understanding spiritual warfare should change our relationships. With God, knowing about spiritual warfare should deepen our dependence on Him. I saw how people who truly understood their weakness to pride developed deeper prayer lives and more genuine worship. With others, understanding this cosmic battle helps us show more grace. We realize everyone faces similar struggles with pride and temptation. With ourselves, Jesus taught me something profound. True humility, he said, isn't thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. He shared specific strategies for spiritual victory. The power of gratitude amazed me. Thankfulness, Jesus explained, directly fights against pride. I watched how developing a habit of genuine gratitude protected people from Lucifer's deceptions. Being vulnerable has special strength. While pride builds walls, being open about our struggles builds bridges. I saw how people who shared their weaknesses actually grew stronger spiritually. Serving others proves powerful too. Jesus showed me how serving, especially when nobody notices, helps defeat the pride that brought Lucifer down. Truth provides protection. Remember, Jesus said, how Lucifer twisted truth to deceive. Stay grounded in my word. I saw how regular Bible study protected people from subtle lies. Worship creates a shield. True worship, focused on God rather than religious performance, builds spiritual protection. I watched as genuine praise pushed back darkness and strengthened believers. Jesus then showed me how this understanding transforms different parts of modern life. In education, we need to be careful. When we pursue knowledge with humility and recognize God as the source of all truth, we gain real wisdom. But when knowledge makes us proud, it becomes a trap. In business, understanding spiritual warfare changes how people handle money and success. Those who see themselves as managers of God's resources, not owners, stay spiritually healthy even when they prosper. Our entertainment choices matter more than we think. Jesus told me, what you feed your mind shapes your spiritual sensitivity. Our choices about what we watch and listen to either strengthen or weaken our spiritual defenses. In our relationships, understanding spiritual warfare helps us see clearly. Our real enemies aren't other people. The real battle is against spiritual forces trying to divide us. Then Jesus revealed something amazing about the final victory. Watch, he said, how love triumphs over pride in the end. He showed me glimpses of the future, not specific predictions, but the general flow of God's plan. Love, shown through humble service and genuine worship, gradually transformed lives and communities. I watched people who understood these truths become lights in their worlds. There was a teacher bringing God's love into her classroom through patient service, a business leader transforming company culture through humble leadership, a parent breaking old family patterns of pride by choosing love, a teenager influencing friends through genuine humility and faith, a retired person finding new purpose in quiet acts of service. Jesus showed me how each small victory over pride helps God's bigger plan. He said, "Every time someone chooses humility over pride, service over self-promotion, love over indifference, they help reverse what Lucifer's fall did." He taught me new ways to look at life. Success isn't about being better than others. It's about fulfilling God's unique plan for our lives. Difficulties aren't just problems. When faced with faith, they become opportunities for spiritual growth and victory. Every moment matters because it's a chance to choose between pride and humility, between love and self-interest. Our biggest purpose isn't to become great. It's to show God's character through humble service. In church life, things need to change too. Worship should focus on God's glory, not on putting on a show. Service should flow from love, not duty or wanting recognition. Real fellowship gives strength against spiritual attacks and support for growth. Good leadership follows Jesus' example of humility instead of worldly power games. Victory comes in special ways. Through keeping at it day by day. Small, consistent choices for humility and love build spiritual strength over time. Through staying alert to what's really happening in the spiritual realm. Through connecting with other believers who support us and hold us accountable. Through showing grace because we understand our own weakness to pride. Jesus showed me how this battle ends. Love wins, he said, not through force, but when people freely choose truth and love. Every humble act, every choice of love over pride, adds to this final victory. As my time with Jesus came to an end, he gave me final instructions. Share what you've seen, he said, not to scare people, but to encourage them. Help them understand spiritual warfare and the power of humble love. He showed me how to share this message. Share with hope, because understanding spiritual warfare should inspire hope, not fear. Share with humility, because sharing these truths shouldn't make us proud. Share with love, because the goal is helping others grow closer to God, not showing off what we know. Share with wisdom, because different people need different parts of these truths at different times. Then, with infinite tenderness, he touched my forehead. I found myself back in my broken body as paramedics worked to save my life. My physical recovery took a long time, but my spirit changed right away and forever. Now I see everything differently. Every choice, every conversation, every moment matters eternally. It's always a chance to choose love over pride, service over self-promotion. I'm sharing this experience not to draw attention to myself, but to help you understand what's really happening in the spiritual realm. The battle that began with Lucifer's pride continues today, but victory is certain for all who choose to walk in humility and love. When you feel tempted toward pride or focusing on yourself, think about Lucifer's fall. But more importantly, remember Jesus' perfect example of humility and love. The choice is yours. It always has been, and it always will be. Choose love, choose humility, choose life.